time out of their busy schedules to be among us today, whether in person or online. And welcome you all to the third day of the international conference titled 10th Eastern Himalayan Natural Weeks Forum 2022. Ecology is Economy, jointly hosted by the Balibara Foundation of Assam in India and the Center of Bay of Bengal Studies at the Independent University Bangladesh. I would also like to thank and welcome our honorable trustee members of the BOT, IB, our beloved students, our faculty and staff members, the participants and the discussants who will present their papers and friends from the media, and everyone present among us today. Thank you all. For our first session on climate change, detrimental effects on Sunderbans, I would like to humbly request Chair Bittu Sahgal, founder, Sanctuary Nature Foundation, India. We have Professor Mizan R. Khan, Deputy Director, ICCCAD, Bangladesh. We have Professor Monirul H. Khan, Professor of Zoology, Jahangirnagar University. We also have Kazi Amdadul Hoque, Senior Director, Strategic Planning and Head of Climate Action, Friendship NGO, Bangladesh. I would like to come up on stage and take your seats, please. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's why she was right. But just the camera is like facing there, so should we sit on that table? Yeah. Get your mic straight. Yeah.
Now, I would like to request Bittu Sahgal to moderate the session. Thank you.
Yes. So, as we can see, there's just us. But the issue, I think, when they got it filled, will actually go to a very large number of people, and that's what we are. We are, so to speak, a studio right now, and we're talking about the issues that actually make a difference and matter to us. So let's put it like this. Before we start, I'd like to put up a 5-minute film that we had put, actually had put up about, I think, I don't know, what was the date of that? 8 years ago?
Yes.
7 years ago?
7 years ago.
7 years ago, we put this film up. If we can have the lights down and just put that film on. It's just a 5-minute film on where we are right now and what we have said we would be at. Can you put the outside down?
Light on. Lavita, देख कर पूरा लाइट पावर नहीं ऑफ नहीं हो रहा है। देख कर पूरा पावर ऑफ नहीं होना चाहिए। जिसको आता है लाइट ऑफ करने वही ऑफ करेगा, दूसरा कोई नहीं।
পাওয়ারের যাতে কোনো সমস্যা না হয়, এদিকের পাওয়ারের যাতে কোনো সমস্যা না হয়।
Only light,
Yeah, that's it. We can start.
Yeah, full screen. Full screen. Yeah.
After independence, this
After this,
after independence, this person Sampath, he has a presentation.
Sampath. Yeah. It's not. It's a song. Yeah. It's in email format as well as in PowerPoint. Yeah, maybe we have some of the tickets. And WNPS, I think I got. I'll wait. You just put it.
Sure.
Anybody says that protecting biodiversity
Let me know if I
is
can
not a life or death
about
issue,
the sheep
you should ask the families of the people who were assassinated. Because they were
Is
really
there any
doing nothing else but
consent or
protecting
anything?
wild
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know.
This
Yeah.
show
Let me know
was
if I
put
can
up
go
about
this
7 years
session.
ago by us, by
And I'll
Thankfully.
contact them.
And we really produced it for a group of people, maybe 1,000 people, which were in the hall. And we did this, Rita, in a period of about 3 days. That's all it took to put this film together because the story had already been told, the script had already been written by circumstance. Before we knew what had happened, we got views from Russia, we got views from China, we got views from Ireland, we got views from Australia, we got 6 million views, and we got a notice from YouTube that this is not your copyright, the money goes to somebody else. We said, look, great, bring it on and let's go ahead. But the story was known. When we produced this film 7 years ago, we had time to do something about the issues that we are talking about today, Monirul. And without much ado, I think that in this room there's nobody who doesn't know the issue. So we won't go into the issue. But I will say before I ask the speakers to come on and speak, that I've been part of Project Tiger since the 70s.
Is it okay?
At that point, there was a huge human rights issue. That why are you stopping people from going into the Sunderbans to fish? Same thing was happening in the 9 tiger reserves that we declared. All we had said was that overfishing had become the order of the day way back then. there was a lot of opposition. There was a lot of division, and it broke my heart to see that happen because we were really working for the people of the Sunderbans. But we said, in this area, in this small area, Sunderbans over there, 4,000 square kilometers, I think 6,000 plus over here, Monirul. And in that 4,000, we said 1,300 square kilometers should become sacrosanct.
Okay.
That means let the fish breed as they breed, let the dendritic dolphins be, let everything be. Okay, we weathered the storm for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. There was a lot of criticism.
So I am
And then the
presenting
most,
this one is
most wonderful thing happened.
ICCCAD.
It was strange. We never anticipated it.
He will
But
not. He will
the
not.
honey trappers,
I mean, it's just. I think.
their honey collection went up by double without going into
the
that
same
100,
person,
that
then I-
1,250 square kilometer area.
She has the
Outside, the honey production went up by, it was phenomenal, and it's still a pretty good way we're trying different things now. The fish take, the fish, the honey collectors, they actually earn more money on the outside, and more important, there were human deaths. The human deaths dropped by 50% in 3 years' time to 4 years' time. Now, at those days, there was no social studies done. It was done more on the basis of reportage, how many people died, how many people didn't die, this, that, and the other. So that was then. By the time we came out to the issue of trying to find a rationale to protect the Sundarbans, remember what we were fighting in India, Monirul? We were fighting thermal plants. They said we want to put a thermal plant and use mangrove wood to fuel it. Now, after we nearly fainted, we went back and explained that, Dada, ऐसा होगा ना, ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. You won't be able to do it before you know what's happened. There'll be no forest left. But the biggest problem that we had with Project Tiger, which was actually considered to be the world's most successful conservation rewilding project ever tried in recent history, it had one fatal flaw, two fatal flaws. One, we didn't plan for success. All we said was there are so many tigers here, these are the habitats. They were chosen not on the basis of where is the most tiger. One was Sundarban, one was Namdapa, one was Ranthambore. Where there were Ranthambore, there were 7, 8 tigers over there. There were 30,000 cows. There were 14, 15, 16, 18 villages inside. We never planned for success. We planned to have a holding operation. But we never recognized how quickly nature repairs itself when human beings are not going to cause the problem. So today we are finding a situation. We got 56 tiger reserves in India. As far as the Sunderbans is concerned, whether it's Niti Aayog, which was our planning commission, or whether it is to the corporates that we go to very often, what we said was that please don't look upon this as a place to save tigers. You look upon this as an infrastructure. Calcutta will not function without the Sundarbans. If it was not there, the Aila or whichever cyclone, there are going to be many more cyclones. They will not allow economics to survive. They will not allow social security to exist because these are the buffers. It's not just a question of trees. This is an infrastructure that not only protects you from the cyclone but feeds you. It's feeding people all the way to Thailand. So these rationales that have been coming forth, you heard Professor Dasgupta speak. I think the conservation game and rules have changed. With the pandemic, with the cyclones, with the droughts, with the floods, I would, uh, I would say right now that if there was ever any reason for us to stop thinking in terms of Bangladesh as a different country and India as a different country, it has to be somewhere in the Sundarban. It is the one place which has no border, no boundary, no nothing. The tiger doesn't know that. That's almost a cliche. But the hard fact is that if our policies are not in sync, then there are people who cross the border. And whether it is the illegal wildlife trade or whether it is illegal fishing, we will be incapable of protecting the most valuable asset in the era of climate change. Everybody knows this is a carbon sink. Whether we like it or not, it's going to be a carbon sink unless the mangroves go, and they can go. If we don't take care, they can go, and we have three experts here I would like them to call and introduce themselves rather than me reading three lines about you, Monirul. I would request Professor Monirul H. Khan, Professor of Zoology, Jahangirnagar University, Bangladesh, to come introduce yourself, tell us about your Sunderbans, because there's no better people than these to let us know why we protect the Sunderbans, how we protect the Sunderbans, and how this is actually one of the strike strategies to fight climate change. Wonderful stuff. I'm telling you, in my belief, it's not Washington, it is not sitting in Paris, it is not sitting in Switzerland, it's not sitting somewhere else. Attitudes are the ones we need to export. And we don't need to import false ambition. Right now, we're at the cusp. I think that with COP15 going on and the very disappointing COP27, I think that we will find ourselves in a situation that what you speak today will be magnified, will be heard, will be taught, will be spoken to young people. I see some young people in this hall. I would like to end what I've got to say with an apology. I am so sorry for my very foolish generation, this white headed generation that never understood that when we threw the British out and said, no, we've had enough. In the name of God, go. This is what Gandhi had said. We forgot that the tools of colonization remained. So, are we now going to ourselves, are we going to become the new colonizers, the ultimate colonization adventure, which is intergenerational colonization? I don't want to be remembered like that. At least let's go down fighting if we have to go down, but remember the biosphere will always win. The biosphere will always win. The Sundarbans didn't come up 10 million years ago. It came up much, much, much more recently, as we'll hear from you. So, Monirul, would you please? Thank you.
Thank you, Bittu, for your nice introduction. Good morning. I have been working on the Sunderbans and some other wilderness areas of Bangladesh of biodiversity concern, but today I will focus only on the Sunderbans. So, as you have seen in the short film, uh, the same can apply to the Sunderbans. She is alive, she is beautiful, but we are hurting her in many ways, in the short term and in the long term. So let me just put the context first. As you probably already know, that this is the biggest single mangrove forest that's surviving on Earth, which is our pride for both Bangladesh and India, that we have this forest, we still have it. Now, ecologically, this is one unit. Whether it is in Bangladesh part or whether it is in Indian part, ecologically, it is the same Sundarbans ecosystem that we are talking about. And while talking about the tigers, deer, or whatever we talk, they don't know what is the international boundary. They just know that Sundarbans is their home. So that's it. And while talking about conservation, we conservationists or we conservationist community should act just like those tigers and those deer. We don't have any boundary. We only thing we care is that the ecosystem survives, and so as the all those species of plants and animals survive. So that is the main thing. Sorry. Now come to the crisis. As you all know that mangroves by nature, it grows in a very delicate layer of what should I say, the low tide and high tide. You cannot just grow mangroves in Dhaka, or you cannot just grow mangroves in Chittagong. It is just a delicate area of the high tide and low tide zone where mangroves can grow. Even in the high tide and low tide zone, you cannot just plant a particular species of mangrove to anywhere. It is the nature that decides where should grow what. Say for example, the sundri, which is the hardwood tree. Sundri will grow a little bit back, a little bit higher ground, whereas nipa and some other plants, they will grow just close to the water. So even in that delicate uh, balance between the high tide and low tide, there are some very fine tunes, I would say, very fine tunes of different species, how different species survive and maintain the balance. So it is such a delicate place that any interference from human beings, whether in short term and long term, will be detrimental. And 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 all the crisis basically comes from human activities. Let me start with the short term problems. As you know that huge number of people depend on the resources of the Sundarbans, maybe a few million, I don't know. So this huge number of people depend on the resources of the Sundarbans, but still they are not the main threat. They are always colored as the main harvesters and main destroyers to some extent, but in my view, they are not. They depend on the resources that are largely renewable. And if we can maintain a balance between the production and the harvest, then it should not be a problem. So sustaining the livelihood of people should not be very difficult. But the problem is the corporate bodies and all the industries and all the power plants and all these growths that are happening all along the boundary of the Sundarban. That worries me more than anything. Now, once this growth takes place, the industries, hundreds and thousands of people will rush. And not only people, all the services will be there, all the power supply will be there. That will produce pollution, and that will pollute our water system, our soil, air, everything. And that is in short term, that is the biggest threat that I think we need to address. And in the long term, the biggest threat is obviously the sea level rise due to the climate change and everything. In my lifetime is not very long. I mean, in last 25, 30 years, what I saw through my eyes, I saw a lot of change, especially in the southern part of the Sundarbans, in Bangladesh part of the Sundarbans. I saw lands vanish, just vanished. Some areas totally vanished to the sea in my lifetime, in last 25, 30 years only. And the cyclone that you are familiar with, cyclones are more severe and more frequent nowadays, and we all know it. So all these things are happening because of the global climate change and everything. And for that, the one good solution would be to allow the mangroves to migrate landwards, because mangroves has the ability to migrate. And the Sundarbans that we see in the southern part of the Bangladesh and India, it was not here maybe few hundred years ago. It was far north, uh, maybe close to Lucknow or even further north. So it gradually went southwards. So that means that it can gradually return to northward if we allow it to come, if we allow it to migrate. But the problem is the entire northern belt of the Sundarbans has been occupied by human activities. And if you allow the mangroves to grow, it can grow up to Khulna or up to Calcutta maybe. But we are not allowing it to migrate. So the only solution to this all this climate change, global climate change, and all these things, I think, is to allow the Sundarbans to migrate northwards. And whatever we think of a solution, that might be a very good solution if we can maintain a buffer along the northern boundary. If we can maintain a buffer in order to facilitate this northward migration of the Sundarbans in the face of this growing sea level rise and everything, that might be a solution. So I will stop from here, but I will join to the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you. May I request Kazi Imamul Haq? Sorry? Amdadul. I'm so sorry with the pronunciation. Will you please introduce yourself briefly, and then we will have an interactive session soon after that.
Well, this is Kazi Amdadul Hoque. I work with Friendship NGO as a senior director, and and distinguished panelists, the participants. I am not a scientist. I am a storyteller because I work around Sundarban. So data statistics is not really my area. I collect data from these people, and I try my best to address those. And let me start with very three, four, five bullet points, and for the scientists and for the students as a clue. Then I will share my stories. First of all, as you learn, Sundarban both side around 10,000 square kilometer. But please add a new learning: 400 square kilometer disappeared. And the fifth island disappeared is called Dokhin Talpotri, South Talpotri. So number one. And number two, actually, if you ask me, there is some point I actually collected. That is agricultural land and shrimp cultivation, the lovely shrimps, occupied more than 20,000 hectares land. And not only that, around one and beyond that, I'm not sure many of the workshop participant, conference participant will travel Sundarban. I'm immediate after the conference, and be sure the resort you will stay that was the Sundarban. The area you will visit, that is disturbance. But I'm not restriction. I'm not, putting a restriction. Enjoy and visit there and find how really we can best the balance. Around 150 industry at this moment is running around Sundarban, including coal power plant. So I'm not sure. And in addition to that, uh, the ecology for is economy. If you consider that perspective, ecological service value for Sundarban in 2001 was $400 million in 2001, and the scientists, they are predicting in 20 to within next 200 years or 200 or 300 20 or 30 years, it will less than 45%. It will reduce 45%. Conclusion. Conclusion is one around 2 million people, directly or indirectly, 1.4 indirectly and 0.25 directly, dependent on Sundarban. So you understand the whole consequence and context. And we realize that this is all frustration and friendship, my organization where I work. That is, we realize how really we can connect frustration with the hope. Then we started, why don't we start a mangrove plantation, afforestation? And then we realized, until unless people around Sundarban understand the importance of mangroves properly, it's very difficult to, make sure that trees plantation, not only plantation, is growing and ensured. Then we invested huge time for the people to realize, to understand why important Sundarban. Usually, people we used to say Sundarban is the safeguard or biological shade for the coastal people. Please be sure it's not coastal people; the whole Bangladesh. Then we started plantation. Meantime, around 150 hectares done, 300 trees planted. The largest private mangrove nursery we belong to in those areas. And very recently, what is the main challenge? Do you know? Not cyclone, not tidal surge, not storm, not pirates. These are the known. You can find all Googles. The challenge is goat. Eating all the saplings. Regeneration is not possible. So we added, new component in our projects, putting fencing, and we realized that's a great solution. So yes, it worked a lot, more than 80%, 90%. And very recently, I've been there. Then at one point, I noticed it was a bit dark. The some people, they manage their goat. and they just leave them inside they just manage, around, and they just leave them inside the sapling areas in new plantation areas, because he needs to make sure that his goat need food. So and because the goat is his fixed deposit, your and mine fixed deposit is the Standard Chartered Bank, but his fixed deposit is the cow, goat, this, that. Until I manage this balance, I make sure the availability of his fixed deposit and his need, it's very difficult to fight with this situation. So we made a negotiation with them. For certain time, they can get access to the plantation area, they can cut grasses, and this is not really enough. And this situation is really continuing. So we introduced the alternate livelihood options. And that took around 4 or 5 years. But now it's a great news. Last within 3 4 months before I've been in the site, one area is called Nakna, is in Ashashuni Upazila, who the Bangladeshi people may know very well. Please be there. Please be there. And if you really wish to be there, ask me. I can arrange. I found few people, they are catching fish, and they actually spending time, it seems like idle in the bank of river. And I said that it was around a huge hot day it was. And I said, what are you doing? He actually targeting his crab catching or the fish catching. Somehow he managed to place a trap. Then I asked him, how much you earn? He said around uh, 200, 300 taka to 600 taka per day. And then I calculated per hectare, per hectare mangrove plantation within 4.5 years can manage bread and butter for 5 family, and very win-win situation. And now this community realize this is important for their livelihood. And not only that, for the whole world, the Europe and Western, or the big people, the mangrove is a carbon sequestration issue, is a natural machine. I do agree. But for me, carbon sequestration is point number three. My first point, mangroves is saving lives in Sundarban areas. My second point, mangroves is source of livelihood. You just heard from Professor Monirul the Nipa. Nipa disappeared. Nipa was the one and only source for rooftop in Sundarban areas in several decades, last 100 years. Now Nipa disappeared. We can't manage Nipas. I know in some other places maybe Nipa is there, but in Shamnagar, the Ashashwani areas, we hardly see Nipa. So, as I mentioned you, I am not scientist, I am not explorer. I just tell you the stories what I really witness. So I need to refresh my learning with you all, but at the same time, let's look back this situation and this context. How can we I would like to echo that we don't stop people, but let's find a way how we can make it win-win situation. Last but not least, this land 50 years before was a agricultural land. This land. And after 50 years, the scientists mentioned Sundarban may disappear or 70% disappear. Not unlikely, you will find Sundarban University on the land of Sundarban, and my grandchild be a student there. Thank you.
So, Professor Mehran Khan, may I also ask you to touch upon what you think the impact of climate change will be on the Sundarbans? We are talking about the Sundarbans as being protecting us from climate change, but please, floor is yours. He is the Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development.
In fact, you have put me the wrong question in the sense that I'm not a natural scientist, I'm not a physical scientist, I'm a social scientist, but working on climate change area, particularly in climate change economics and politics, I at least try to understand the language of those scientists. As Professor Monirul mentioned, some impacts in the sense the ability of Sundari trees or Sundarbans to migrate, mangrove forests to migrate. That is an excellent idea if we can allow. But Sundari trees or mangroves can thrive only at a certain level of salinity and also at a certain level of depth of water. And that is being kind of challenged by climate change because salinity level is increasing to a large extent where most of the species of mangroves cannot sustain anymore. This is the challenge. But climate change impacts. Mangroves are also a boon for addressing climate change impacts because it serves as kind of a windbreak as well as also controller of floods. Not to talk of fisheries abundance and sanctuary of fisheries, but as Mr. Sahgal has mentioned, that with the older generations failing, the conservation project in the sense of our mission. Mr. Amdad has mentioned about what they are doing, and they are doing excellent things. Friendship is very much involved in conservation area. But I will bring in, as I myself am a kind of a climate change negotiator for long, long years. I had been an IPCC author also. I will bring in a little first international perspective. If you look at the international global perspective of conservation, then at the earliest stages of development, when countries and people remain poor, then they destroy nature, then they deforest only to survive. Industrial countries also passed that phase. Once their income went up, then surplus uh, at personal and national level developed, and they could reinvest for replantation. But plantation and forest is not the same thing. Plantation is forest for commercial, industrial purposes. But forest is something that contains biodiversity that should sustain for longer times, like mangrove forest. But because of biotic pressure, it is being destroyed. So the first, from international perspective that I was sharing, but for countries like India or Bangladesh, our challenge is we have to conserve for our own survival as well as economically develop. So we cannot depend much on the forest resources like mangroves, not from national perspective as well as not from the individual livelihood perspective, because those experts have clearly mentioned that the kind of healthy growth of mangroves and their sustainability is a function of the distance that local communities and forest department can take off, because it should be a policy of pure exclusion with no biotic pressure for few years, at least 10, 12, 15, 20 years. Then we can have a really regrown mangrove with more and more tigers, because biotic pressure is harming Sundarbans. He gave the example of goats, for example. So the government's clear priority should be generation of employment of Sundarban areas so that they don't need to depend on Sundarbans for their livelihoods. And this is something where governance issues comes in, because whatever level of employment generations are made or generated by both NGOs, local governments, and national governments, if we cannot have better governance, for example, then those goats will get in. Not just goats, but big timber merchants will get in if we cannot have a good governance process established because of corruption, because of that is one thing. So I am not now. I will mention about a little bit of funding possibilities for mangrove forests. There are good, I think if we can develop good projects, for example, for enriching Sundarbans and for its sustainability, then funding should not be a problem, because under the UN Convention, for example, we have the RED Plus mechanism now, reducing emissions from degradation and deforestation, and plus this sign was added at the insistence of India for conservation. Okay. So, unlike in the Kyoto Protocol or in the convention, this Paris Agreement has got a provision that if we can maintain forest, because forests serve as a sink, and that serves our purpose as well as the purpose of the no big emitters, because they absorb carbon dioxide. So under the convention, under the Paris Agreement, there is provision that if we can keep the forests healthy and growing, a sink of forest, a sink of carbon dioxide, then we can get money. And Norway is a big funder for this RED Plus. America also does fund, because America doesn't compromise with their other lifestyles, high emitting lifestyles. This is kind of some. Plus, we have, I think India also has got funding. In Bangladesh also, we have got our own trust funds. So funding should not be a problem, but I think it's the mission, it's the vision that should matter. And as Mr. Sahgal has showed his gray hair, I also have gray hair, but because of my frantic efforts to stay young, I try to keep it a little black. But my point is that, as he mentioned, that our older generations are utterly failing. So we need to bring in the young leadership for conservation, because we are not doing the right thing, not in climate, not in emissions reduction, not in conservation. Why we should promote for youth leadership, for example, because youth leadership for conservation, youth generation, for the first time, they are experiencing most. They will already are experiencing, because we live already in a climate change world, and they will live through this new normal, and their children too. So they are more sensitized than we are. Second point about youth leadership is they are better educated than our generation, in the sense that our generation had degrees, for example, in silo disciplines, for example, in physics, chemistry, or economics, or political science. Okay, we didn't have the space and the scope for multidisciplinary education, and conservation, addressing climate change management or biodiversity management involves multi and interdisciplinary education. And both in Bangladesh as well as India and in Western societies, universities, there are lots of now this kind of multidisciplinary programs which are needed. And young generations are increasingly having their getting graduate degrees from those universities. So they are, I am sure, I believe, much better educated, and they understand the issues much better than we did at our younger years. Third is, this young generation is much more active. They are live with energy. They don't have spaces. They look for spaces to invest their energy and resources, whatever they have. So, and they are extremely active in networking. I often attend international meetings. So young generation is very active. We older generation have kind of some reservation. We don't, elbow our way onto someone else. But young generation are careless about. They just like bulldozer hammer. They get into and exchange their cars and then continue their conversations. So for these reasons, we must promote youth leadership. They will certainly require, they may require special training for that, but we older generation are ready to do that. So with this, I will finish my statement. Thank you.
So what time do we end exactly? 12 in 4 minutes. 12:05. Okay, so here we will have questions. You've heard what people have spoken about right now. There are two or three things, Monirul, that between India and Bangladesh we should discuss, and we will discuss them later on, maybe using Zoom, maybe using actual meetings. One is that look what happened in Syria. Syria was the fertile crescent. It was the breadbasket of the world. It's where I believe women might have been very responsible for actually inventing agriculture, where people were going out and fighting and getting mammoths. So it took 4 consecutive droughts for a migration to take place, which the Western media first I diagnosed as Shia Sunni problem, this problem, that, but it was actually no water. So this was one thing, and it has relevance to this. The second thing is that when you take, let's say, an organization like the World Bank, which says we will give you $100 million to build cement bunds, but those cement bunds are still on mud. In the Sunderbans, you don't have rock down there. So we have to think about our solutions ourselves and see exactly what is going to happen. The Syrian issue right now should be alive in all our heads. We know what happened when the miserable 1970s murders took place over here. Call them whatever you will. The migration was, I think, around, Monirul, that's Professor, about 8, 10 million people must have come off to the Indian side, then some came back. 10 million, but it made both nations, it traumatized both nations. I'm saying to you that the Syrian migration was just 3, 4 million people, 5 million people. When this happens, when the Sundarbans, if we do not control and we do not act as part and parcel of the solution globally, I'm thinking 20, 25 million people. At that point, I don't think the Indian subcontinent has the resilience to even survive as a social structure. Forget about everything else. So these are the real problems that we see in the long run, and what are we bequeathing to our children? Given this, please, we have some of the best minds. Please ask your questions. We can come here. I think there's no more films to be done, so they can see you. Would you like to do that? Are you comfortable where you are? Okay. All right. So questions, please. Anybody that has anything to ask about the Sundarbans in light of what you've just heard? Please, just your name and the question, please.
I was just thinking about Mr. Ahmed's presentation. What he said is correct. I mean, basically, grazing is really a problem in establishing plantation in Sundarban, no matter it's by forest department or by a private organization. We have been trying some alternative. I'm from Arunda Foundation. My name is Fariduddin Ahmed. I'm a forester and I have been working in different areas of Bangladesh, particularly conserving forest through mobilizing communities. So one of the alternatives is growing some grasses. Cattle stall feeding, that's one of the alternatives. Stall feeding is an alternative, and otherwise it's not goat. Rather, main problem is with buffalo, because there are some buffalo. Those are the main problems of Sundarban that destroys plantation through grazing. I think that's the point I wanted to add.
Good. So you want to expand on that? Or should we take one or two more questions and maybe we can? Yes, please. Just ask the questions so that we can answer them together, given Probir's very strict look.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Shahidullah. Actually, I am a retired Forest Research Institute from scientist. I had experience to work in Sundarbans for 15 years, more than 15 years, because from 1987 to 2001, I don't know the both of them. What is the basis of their data? Actually, the land is not a problem in the Sundarbans, and I think there is no destruction of land. Yes, some erosion, but some siltation, some accretion also, some landslide also. I can say in 19 for example, 1960 forestal map, 1982 ODA map, and probably 1999 FRMP project, funded project. There is aerial map. There is no destruction of land in the Sunderbans.
Yep.
There is no land destruction of this. Yes, there is destruction of flora and maybe the change of floral composition in the Sundarbans. In one time, the Sundar is we know everybody, the Sundar is the many species and 73% Sundar is there. And now it is less and decreasing day by day. Why? One time there was a huge regeneration of Sundari. And Sundari is dominated in the low saline water zone. That is the eastern and the northeastern zone. And other places, but now due to siltation and also some increase of salinity, it is decreasing.
Right, sir.
Bangladesh Forest Research Institute, there is a division in the Bangladesh Forest Research Institute at Khulna, Mangrove Silviculture Division. They have data from 1982 onward till date. There is no major change of salinity, water salinity and also soil salinity. There is no major change.
No, this
But
what you're saying, sir, is completely correct. That at the end of the day, even Nepal and India are donating land from our
yes,
from siltation right down to Bangladesh. But the fact is that we now need to move on. If there's any other question, then I'll ask the three
thank you.
gentlemen here to answer them together. Otherwise, we can just give you your closing remarks. Whatever it is, 10,000 square kilometers, 1 hour. How are you going to discuss? But I think should we start in the order that we'll give you the last word, sir. So, but we need the mic back.
I have one question.
Please, all right, good.
Richard Joe from Conservation International. What you're describing here is really a very slow motion humanitarian crisis. Do you feel like governments, both India, Bangladesh, and governments around the world are aware of this crisis? And what can we do to raise that kind of awareness?
Good questions. Would anyone of Monirul start with you? Would you like to come here and answer it? Come, so they can see you. Because these will be your closing remarks as well. So.
Thank you. Let me start with the land loss issue. I think this is a more recent phenomenon, like 25 years, and there are number of scientific studies based on all the credible scientific data and everything, and there are scientific publications as well. In the last 25 years, the land loss is very obvious, but it's happening more recently. So that is one thing. And regarding the government view on all these issues and problems, I think both Bangladesh and Indian governments are too much occupied with the infrastructural development and the GDP growth and things like that. So whether we like it or not, biodiversity conservation or ecosystem conservation, it's not yet a priority issue to the government. Therefore, we have things to do. We need to sensitize the decision makers and the government, and we need to highlight the importance of the Sunderbans, especially focusing on the theme that ecology is economy. That means how this Sundarbans ecosystem is actually feeding us, how this vibrant Sundarbans ecosystem is actually supporting this huge number of people who thrive on fishing, crab catching, honey hunting, and things like that. So if we are deprived of this service of ecosystem services, then what will happen to all these people who are depend on these resources? That is one thing. And the other thing is that the Sundarbans, it serves as a natural barrier from all those tidal surge and everything. What is the cost of that? We just don't know. It's a huge cost. So we need to sensitize the decision makers and policy makers, and that is our job to do. And we need to act now to do that. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much, Farid Bhai, and I think it's a great suggestion. And we are trying, and I think the one big challenge, until unless conference, workshop, seminar, symposium, we will hardly find these expert people in one table. So I think we can, if as much as you can, meet, then that would help each other. So reference already Professor Monirul mentioned, but I can share you link, the Sundarban disaster damage displacement. And if you put www.sahapedi.org, and you'll find hundreds of data. Let me tell you one in 1 minute story. That is, now I can disclose it. Last year, maybe, in Bangladesh, there is a newspaper, it's called Daily Star. If you put my name, Kazi Amdadul, and my name, Amdad, Amdadul, you will find some stories, there's some articles. One article published, and I got a mail from London, and one big scientist wrote, Kazi, I have gone through your article, blah, 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 so many, and there is no evidence of climate change in Bangladesh. I think you must read this book, this book, this book, this book. I supposed to copy Daily Star, but I didn't copy Daily Star. I copied Salimul Hoque. Salimul Hoque is, Salimul Hoque very well. I, found this mail. Oh my God, if they copy CC Daily Star will not publish my article anymore. Then I'm really in a very bad situation. And I was, keeping myself silent and exploring my data. Everything is okay. Strong reference. As I mentioned, I'm not a scientist. I'm a storyteller. Thanks God, after 2 weeks, in a lunch table, I met Dr. Salim al-Haq. He was telling, Brahma criticized my article last week. He says that I got him. I said, sir, who is Brahma? Well, he's a big scientist. He made all the meteorological department 40. He's now 95 or something like this. Oh, your article is no meaningful. He criticizes your article. My article is not an issue. No problem. So then I realized there are many people, scientists in the world, they don't believe climate change. And I don't know, maybe Trump influenced by them. So that's all. And my last point, I asked one woman, this is a very old story. Many people ask, tell me few words about Sundarban. She said, what I can tell you. She took few seconds. She says, Sundarban is I asked her, Sundarban is like my mother. Why you say this? This is like taking care of us, giving us livelihood, protected us, something like this. Her mother, our auntie, we can't ignore, we can't disturb, we can't damage our mother or auntie. We must be respectful as always. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in response to the question that Richard, you have asked, Professor Monirul has responded, but I want to go a little beyond just sensitization of the policymakers, because policymakers understand the issues is the problem, but the solution is not much there. So my proposal is, if we can have kind of a multi-stakeholder committee on Sundarbans, including the civil society, forest department people, because we cannot leave forest conservation only to the forest department, plain and simple. So we need to have this multi-stakeholder committee, including the government officials from the Ministry of Environment and Forest, and then I will come again to the main theme. Ecology is economy. In fact, ecology should go much beyond economy. For example, Sunderbans. How much benefit we get, economic benefit from Sunderbans? We can calculate only partial benefits. For example, fish catch. We cannot, for example, measure the non-economic services of Sunderbans, like windbreak ability of Sunderbans or flood controller or other ecological services that Sunderbans provide. So, ecology has got much more than economic value. Economics considers only what is measured, but many things in our life cannot be measured. This is one my point. And I will refer to German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argued that in our life we should have some higher ends than just filling up our bellies. That is what economic mostly does. If you own 3 or 5 jets, for example, that is also filling up your conservation, your material acquisition, kind of. But human beings, as the best species of Allah, God, or Bhagavan, must have some higher ends than just consumption. So this is my one point. So we need to value for aesthetic reasons, because in human beings we have a biophilia. A natural love for nature is built into human genes. So these human genes, this biophilia, we cannot just measure in economic terms how much we get benefit from Sundarbans or not that. And finally, about the young generation, I will end up with. I believe, heard of the philosopher, British philosopher Bertrand Russell, who died a few decades back. He said one thing: until a young person gets into the family life, if he is not a socialist, he does not have any heart. But then what he says, we older generation behave that way, that once you get into family life, if you are a socialist, you continue remaining a socialist, you don't have any head. Older generation, we behave that way, the latter part. But I believe this young generation, socialist, means having more and a stronger sense of altruism, that they are out to save the world. That is the sentiment the young generation have got, and they will continue these sentiments after even they raise children, they get into family life and all that. Thank you. That is my vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. This meeting comes to an end. The mission doesn't. So I'd like to just leave one piece of homework for you. I'm saying in a simple way that climate change is, how does it affect the Sundarbans? Let's talk about the people of the Sundarbans. There's going to be migration northward from here, irrespective of what we do right now. And I think it's time for governments now to plan an ordered migration outward. If the Titanic were to sink, an orderly evacuation into lifeboats will cause less loss of life. And I think that that should be one of the issues. There are people who want to go out, facilitate them to go out. It will also take pressure off the Sundarbans and take pressure off the people who already live there. We're not going to escape the impacts of climate change, and what happens in the Sundarbans is nothing other than a mirror reflection of what's going to happen in America, in Australia, and every other place. It'll have a different kind of impact, but it's going to impact us all. And I think Sundarbans has a solution. Our attitudes have a solution. Thank you very much, Ranjit Barthakur. Thank you, Balipara Foundation and Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum. I have not seen so many good minds together on the issue of climate change in the recent past, and we're grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, dear speaker.